The Associated Press did some fantastic investigative reporting on the issue of modern-day slavery, and they found that it's all too common, and U.S. companies are actually benefiting from it. And you might be unknowingly purchasing products that, at somewhere down the line, it was tied to slavery. So, I want to give you more details on this. They're specifically, in this case, what they looked into is the shrimp industry in Thailand. And Burmese immigrants are commonly held there as slaves. They say, quote, a UN agency study found nearly 60% of Burmese laborers toiling in its seafood processing industry were victims of forced labor. So they basically explain a day in the life of one of these slaves in Thailand. Every morning, they're forced to get up at 2 a.m. With violent threats, and then if they don't actually get up at 2 a.m., they're beaten. Yeah, that would be a clue here that we're dealing with forced labor, which is also known as slavery. Then they're forced to work 16-hour days. None of their higher-ups know their names. They just call them by a number. And the example they give in the article, I guess they somehow followed a family that has the number 31. And they spend all day ripping the guts out and the heads and the tails and the shells off of shrimp that's bound for overseas markets, including the U.S. and Europe. And they can't even eat together. So the families are basically forced into this situation. They can't even eat together because if they do, the bosses / owners know that they're going to be a risk to basically run away and to do anything to get out of here. So what they do is they force one family member to stay behind and do work while the other ones go eat, and then when the other ones come back, then that one who was working can actually go and eat then. So, I mean, they're well aware of what they're doing here, okay? There's no miscommunication. The slavery is the fucking point. They also go on to say that toilets are overflowing with shit, and there are open sewers with a grotesque, putrid smell emanating right next to their workstations. So they're working with food that inevitably, hits world markets, and right next to it is, open, flowing human shit. So apart from the obvious slavery concerns, there's also sanitation concerns. What? It's so shocking. A place that does slavery also is not very concerned about, having efficient, effective regulation for sanitary purposes. Now, they go on to say the following as well, quote, pervasive human trafficking has helped turn Thailand into one of the world's biggest shrimp providers, despite repeated promises by businesses and governments to clean up the country's $7 billion seafood export industry. The problem is fueled by corruption and complicity among police and authorities. Arrests and prosecutions are rare. Raids can end up sending migrants without proper paperwork to jail while owners go unpunished. So here's where they go on to explain who buys and eats the shrimp. And the answer is everybody. Quote, U.S. customs records linked the exported shrimp to more than 40 U.S. brands, including popular names such as Seabest, Waterfront Bistro, and Aquastar. The AP found shrimp products with the same labels in more than 150 stores across America, from Honolulu to New York City to a tiny West Virginia town of 179 people. The grocery store chains have tens of thousands of U.S. outlets where millions of Americans shop. Slavery, they say, is a $32 billion industry today. $32 billion. This is an incredible report. I encourage everybody to read the entire thing here. I was just giving you what's more or less the Cliff Notes. This is unacceptable, and it is directly tied to globalism. It's directly tied to globalization. So that means that, this idea of do more free trade deals, don't do protectionism. We have to make sure that we do the TPP, which is the next one that they want to do, where, we connect with more nations, then we economically trade. What's really happening, guys, is that in many of the nations, not all of them, but many of them, this is what ends up happening. Multinational corporations end up contracting with slave drivers, and then they force people to work. They keep all the profit. They sell it on the international market at a cheaper price. Meanwhile, it's grotesque, it's immoral. If people knew the facts, they wouldn't want to participate in this system. And the reality is, would all decent people want to pay an extra $2 for a package of shrimp if you knew that somebody who was actually working, at some point in the process was paid a living wage and was not a slave? I think everybody would be okay with that. And this is why I've always said that, we can't, under any circumstance, really know if we do these international so-called free trade deals, which are just outsourcing deals. We'll never really know what kind of conditions our clothes or our food is being made in, whether it's in Bangladesh with the factories that have no regulation and they collapse on people all the time and it's slave labor there as well, or it's elsewhere. Since we never know, why would we want to allow our corporations and Americans to sign on and do business with slave drivers? There should be government rules and regulations which make it so that the consumer knows we're not buying shit from slave drivers. Is that too much to ask? And by the way, that's essentially what we had before we started doing this free trade outsourcing obsession. And the idea was all the goods that come into the U.S. would have a tariff on them. So if your goods were not made in the U.S., and they were made elsewhere, when you bring those goods into the country, let's say they were significantly cheaper because, maybe they were made in slave conditions, you slap a tax on it so that if somebody were to go to the store and have a choice between a U.S.-made, I don't know, you pick it, soap bar versus a Chinese-made soap bar, if they're about the same price, all things being equal, you're more likely to pick the U.S. one. So instead of having the 8-cent Chinese slave labor soap and the $1.89 American bar of soap, you'll have like $1.89 and $1.89, and your choice is between the Chinese and the American one, and then people would be more likely to buy the American one for patriotic reasons, and you just feel like you want to reward workers here as long as the quality of the product is about the same. And I want to bring that back. I'm one of 18 guys in America that openly advocates for what's called protectionism as opposed to so-called free trade, which is just outsourcing and exploiting slave labor. And if you think, well, I mean, come on, we were screwed over here. It's not like our politicians and our lawmakers and our business people really knew that this is what was going on. Oh, of course they did. Oh, of course they did. In fact, they know so much that even the Democrats are partaking in this, and they turn a blind eye to it. Like, for example, in this new deal, the TPP, it was the Democrats who were pushing to get Malaysia in the deal. Now, there's only one problem with that. Malaysia, when you look at their human rights record, they, quote, tolerate slavery. So they're a country that's very lenient, very lax, similar to Thailand in this respect, that they know that there's some slave forced labor going on in their country. And they're like, well, hands off, you pay your bribes to the government and we'll look the other way. And we acknowledge that. We realize that because they were categorized as being poor on the slave labor front. So what did the U.S. government do under Obama? What did the executive branch do? When nobody was looking, they go, okay, just change the categorization of them and how they are with their slave labor. Change it and improve it. And then we'll say, hey, look at that. They fixed it. Now we're going to allow them in the TPP. They didn't actually change anything. They didn't actually change any of the slave labor or the tolerating of it that was happening. The Obama administration just changed the categorization of it, and then they said, welcome to the TPP. And it's the same thing with Brunei, for example. Brunei in 2014, they just implemented Sharia law. In 2014, they just did it. How did the U.S. government respond? I mean, obviously you're thinking, U.S. government, oh, we care about altruism and humanitarianism, and we're the world police, so we sanction them for doing Sharia law and putting down women and gays in their community, right? Is that what we did? No, we gave him a pat on the back and said, come join the TPP. We want to exploit the labor in your country, so we don't give a shit if you oppress your own people with Sharia law. Welcome to the TPP. So we make deals, and I mean, come on, people should be able to pick up on this. We don't care about altruism and humanitarianism and being the world police and doing the right thing. We're fucking buddy-buddy with Saudi Arabia. the worst Salafist government on the planet. They've taken ISIS ideology and implemented it and they've been effective at doing that. And they're one of our best friends. So business as usual overrides everything. So cheap labor and cheap products pushed out by these multinational corporations so they get richer, that's led to us accepting very openly in many respects slave labor. It's time that the American people know about it and we act on it, which means doing what? Other than fighting to get money out of politics so that the business owners don't buy the politicians and get what they want, which in many cases is outsourcing and slave labor. Other than that, you got to get out there. You got to vote for the most progressive candidates, people like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Alan Grayson, who are appalled by this, and they'll fight to end this. We can't have it that we sit idly by while we also buy products that are made by slaves overseas. That's another thing you can do. Vote with your wallet. So now that you know this, and I gave you the names of the companies that are involved in this trade, do not buy those products, because there has to be some sort of consequences to allow stuff like this to continue.